Good afternoon, viewers. It's always a pleasure. I'm Ron Grant coming to you live and direct from our home, our paradise, Tortola in the beautiful British Virgin. Mental Health Awareness Month, celebrated in May, is once again approaching. Its purpose is to raise awareness and educate the public about mental illnesses, such as the persons who suffer from depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder, in addition to many others. Now, the realities of living with these conditions and strategies for attaining mental health and wellness. This year's theme is Tools to Thrive during COVID-19. Joining me to discuss the month of activities observing mental health awareness, as well as the coping strategies and sources that are available here in the British Virgin Islands, is the one and only Dr. Virginia Rubaine. She is the Director of Mental Health Services here in the British Virgin Islands, and we are having a very important conversation. It's 284 Media, a conversation you really don't want to miss. Tune in afterward from our sponsors.
The win.
What in the hell?
I'm freaking out.
Gender
is about these people.
It's always a pleasure coming to you live and direct from the...
What's poppin'? What's really good?
Davis has won it for the
Viewers, welcome back. Thank you so much for sticking with us. Dr. Virginia Rubaine, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to 284 Media.
Thank you for having me.
We are once again approaching May, which is celebrated, and we're observing rather Mental Health Awareness Month all across the world, but particularly in the British Virgin Islands. We're doing everything we can to make sure that the residents and citizens of the British Virgin Islands are coping, are dealing in the best way possible, not only during COVID-19, but when we think of mental health in general. It's still a taboo topic. And when you look as Director of the Mental Health Services here in the BVI at Mental Health Awareness Month 2021, what are your thoughts as it pertains to where we are and how far we still perhaps have to go?
I must absolutely validate what you just said about us coping the best way that we can. The jury is out right now because we don't seem to be able to catch a break.
Yeah.
So we had the Noah and the Ark flood. We had the two storms of the century. And just as we were about to come back from that, we got slammed with COVID. And now that we're, adjusting to living with COVID, now we have another catastrophe in the Eastern Caribbean with La Soufrière. So I think a lot of people in our community, they're just languishing, not really depressed, but kind of over all the trauma and the drama. And I think we are hanging on as best as we could, but we need to do a little better. And I think this year's theme, Tools to Thrive, is so relevant because we need as many tools in our arsenal as possible in order to be able to continue keeping on.
You mentioned about us being able to possibly do better, and we need to do better. Before we get into the week of the month-long of activities, how can we do better as a community, as a village?
Well, the first thing I tell my clients all the time, it's so imperative that we tell the truth. And one of the tools for this year's May's Mental Health Month is radical acceptance. We have to accept the reality that we're in. It's nice to think about the one that we would like to be in, but we have to interact with the world that we actually live in. And I see a lot of people avoiding the real world and entertaining what I like to call the matrix. So
Interesting.
They fall into the whole world of social media, and they're not really participating actively in what's happening in the here and now.
When you think of social media, I must ask you, in the millennial generation, when we look at our society, we look at our young persons in particular who are facing a myriad of challenges, and not only young persons, but persons of age as well. What exactly should we be paying most attention to as a community?
I think the most important thing is for us to stay interconnected. I think what social media and other forms of technology has done is put degrees of separation between us. And so a lot of us are anonymous and we're online and we're giving our thoughts and our feelings. And there's no real consequence because we're anonymous. And I see people are reaching out less and less to each other and interacting less and less, particularly our babies who have been stuck at home because of COVID. I worry about their lack of interpersonal activities where they get to run, play, talk with each other. We're pretty much all talking to screens now, and we don't know what the longitudinal consequence of that will be. Will we be better people for it? Will we be more cold and aloof? Will we be more disengaged? So I think it's so important for us to stay connected as a community and not become apathetic because we're just totally overstimulated by the next disaster, whatever it may be.
When you think of social media and that whole entire, I sometimes want to call it a bit of a catastrophe, and it's interesting that I'm in the media, but when you look at the millennial generation, young professionals, young persons who are growing up in an age of social media, what encouragement would you give to them to really navigate and steer through this very sometimes confusing social media aspect?
Well, we have an adage that we say in the field called work-life balance. I would like to coin social media life balance. If the first thing you do in the morning is reach for your phone, maybe you're not as balanced as you would like to be. I think that life is still to be lived and enjoyed, and I think we have to balance our time in front of the screen on our phones with actual human interaction, caring, sharing, having fun, participating, having deep conversations about things that are relevant.
Yes.
We have to stay connected.
Wonderful. Now, May is being observed, as we mentioned, as a Mental Health Month. Tell us about the month of activities and what exactly that will look like.
Okay, so because of social distancing, we can't do as much as we have done in the past. So we've highlighted 3 key activities for the month of May. On May 29th, we're going to be having a run walk for mental health awareness. And we are asking the community to come out and participate. It's going to start at the festival grounds at 5:30 a.m. And we're going to walk all the way, or run if that's your thing, to Manuel Reef and back to the festival grounds. We'll be accepting any type of donation, clothes, shoes, food, monetary contributions, anything that helps us reach out to our most vulnerable population. On May 27th, we're going to be working with our first responders. We're going to be reviewing and drilling down on the Mental Health Act. We want that all the men and women who provide first responder services here in the Virgin Islands to be on the same page as it relates to dealing with persons with chronic mental illness. And my favorite, May 7th, we're going to be having a wellness fair at the Orlando Hospital. And we're asking the community to come out and interface with all the vendors and agencies that will be participating. You can have lunch at our White Cedar Cafe. We're going to have masseuse. We're going to have Breviderm. We're going to have all sorts of wonderful service providers who are there to give information to the community. And we'll also be giving the COVID vaccine for those who are interested in getting vaccinated.
Wonderful. Now, when you think of mental health, you mentioned about donations. How can persons throughout the British Virgin Islands community who are interested not only in the cause, over the years we've seen a lot of outside celebrities, persons from the U.S. mainland really taking the conversation of mental health to core and to heart. But locally, what could we be doing, and how can persons who are interested in donating or contributing to the cause of mental health, how can they do that?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is be honest about our own mental health and well-being. I took the week off last week because I was not doing well. And I was quite candid with my patients. I said, Dr. Rubaine is having a little mini breakdown, so I got to take a break. Right. I think we need to be honest about what's happening to us. And I think once we normalize being honest about, I feel sad today, or I feel anxious today, or I'm afraid today, I think it will be easier and easier for persons to acknowledge their feelings. Persons who want to give back to the service and the large community of persons with chronic mental illness, they can call us at Mental Health at 852-7675 and find out how they could volunteer and donate. We always have an adventure going on, and we welcome all the hands that could possibly participate.
Now, when we think of mental health, there are a couple of points that we mentioned so far. Accepting reality,
Yes.
which is one. Getting out of thinking traps. I want to also mention triggers. How can persons within our community really observe and analyze and be able to be aware of their triggers as it pertains to mental health?
Well, it goes back to radical acceptance, being honest with yourself, understanding what your shortcomings are. A lot of people fight against the reality that sometimes we make mistakes and sometimes we make bad decisions and sometimes we hurt others and it wasn't intentional and maybe sometimes it was. We have to radically accept who we are, warts and all, in all our glory, and try to be the best person that we could be. I think people get triggered when reality intrudes on what's going on in their mind. So a lot of people engage in magical thinking. I certainly do. I tell myself if I eat this cheesecake, I'm not going to get fat. That's magical thinking. I will get fat. And when the pounds pile on, I'm triggered. I feel
Right.
sad and depressed that I'm now 10 pounds heavier because I ate a whole cheesecake. I wasn't prepared for the consequence of eating the cheesecake because the thought in my mind was not congruent with the reality of the situation. And I think people are having a difficult time dealing with disappointment. Disappointment is the emotion we experience when our expectations do not match the world that we're in. So disappointment is usually the precursor to sadness, hopelessness, and then depression. So if we're being honest with ourselves, if we're analyzing our thoughts, you know, if I think I'm not going to get fat if I eat cheesecake, I need some evidence-based data to support that. Am I going to run 100 miles afterward? Am I going to fast for 3 days afterward? Sometimes we have to challenge some of the things that we believe with hard facts and data.
Now, you speak about magical, that lack of reality. I want to touch on it because within the course of the past few months, we have been plagued throughout our society with a number of events that really speak when we look at it. And one aspect of it could be news-related facts. But when we look at the mental health, perhaps we have a lot of persons in our community, specific to the younger generation, who are living in a very magical world that then allows them and forces them, or enables them rather, to act out and to cause acts of violence to others. Speak on that, please, because it's quite relevant.
Right. So if we were to look at social media as being our own little personal matrix, when we engage in inappropriate behavior on social media, there are no real world consequences. There are no real world consequences. In America, they talk about cancel culture, but we don't have cancel culture here. When we play violent video games, when we enter into the alternate reality that was set up to keep us addicted to it, because social media has us on an intermittent reinforcement schedule. So we're posting things so that people can acknowledge and like them, and in them doing so, it validates us, and in validating us, we feel filled. The problem is it's short and fleeting. And after a while, you don't get the same high from the likes, and you don't get the same high from the people commenting on your posts. And so you start looking outside now. What can I do to maintain this artificial feeling? And I think that's where young people start to get into trouble, because they think that what happens in social media translates into the real world, and it doesn't. And so when they get very real consequences, for example, we see people performing stunts on motorcycles. The Matrix is known for that. The second Matrix, Ducati is my favorite motorcycle. There were all sorts of wonderful motorcycle stunts that were done. But what we don't see behind the scenes is all the cuts and the takes and the stuntmen who were trained, but we also don't see the people who were injured creating those visual feats. We don't see the computer-generated add-ons that make it even more magical. Like Luke Skywalker really doesn't have a lightsaber. He doesn't have a lighted sword that can cut through anything. It's camera tricks.
Yes.
But we're no longer able to differentiate between social media camera tricks and real world. So I jump on my Ducati and I go stunting in the BVI and I get catastrophically injured. Here's the reality. We don't have a trauma center.
Yes,
We don't have
ma'am.
a trauma center here in the BVI. So if I had taken that into consideration before I went stunting on my Ducati, maybe I would have made different choices. And so this is why I think social media right now is the greatest threat to our mental and physical health. I know that's very unpopular, but it's very true. If you're living in the matrix, then you're not in Zion.
I totally agree, and I have to thank you so much for those wonderful examples. I want to talk about processing changes, particularly big changes. We're living in a always evolving
Yes.
world, especially now with COVID-19. We have been forced to change the way we work, the way we interact, the way we think. How is it really when it comes to processing change and mental health? Speak to us about that aspect.
I think the less we're able to process big changes, the worse it impacts our mental health. Think about it, Ron. So we had the flood. We didn't even recover from the floods. Then we had the two catastrophic storms. Then we had COVID. It's just been a series of things. And I don't think people have had the time or the wherewithal to process the change because everything is moving at the speed of light. I think it requires individuals to actually stop, slow down, remove the distractions. And you know what your distraction of choice is. And actually sit down and reflect on where you've been and where you're going and radically accept it. You see that thing they call acceptance? It's very important because we create our own misery and distress when we try to fight against reality. The psychological energy that we put into fighting against reality, it keeps us from processing the big changes.
You mentioned quite a bit about the cultural relevance, and I want to go back to that. When we look at our community here in the British Virgin Islands, of course, mental health affects everyone. But what are some things and some habits, perhaps, that we're engaging as a community that could be working towards our disadvantage when it comes to mental health?
Okay, that's a very good question. We don't have honest conversations. We don't call a spade a spade. We often try to rationalize and explain away negative consequences for poor choices. We don't hold each other accountable. I tell this story all the time. When I was about 8 or 9, I was singing in the house to the top of my lungs. And my mother was passing and she said, you know what? You need to study your lesson because you can't sing. Now, some people would think, oh my God, this dream killer. First of all, it wasn't a dream of mine to be a singer. And I think if it were, and I had gone to her and said, Mommy, you know, I don't have a natural talent for singing, but I'd like to learn, she would have supported it. But what she did do is redirect me into my real talent, which was
indeed.
Academia, right? And that's what she said. I mean, it wasn't the most sophisticated statement, but I understood what she meant. And one of the things that I tell people all the time, I know my mother loves me because she's going to tell me the truth. If she's watching right now and I come off the air, she's going to say, I liked your makeup. Or I didn't like how your lip had look. Or she would say something to give me feedback.
Honest feedback.
We're afraid to give honest feedback because we don't want to offend or hurt anybody. But the reality is some of us are average, some of us are below average, some of us are high average. She didn't encourage me into singing, but she encouraged my brother, Kilatuma, who now has like the hottest LP that's out.
Because that was his gift.
That was his thing. And so we supported that. So I think people need to start telling people the truth. You know, if I have on a bathing suit at work, I want my staff to come and tell me that that's inappropriate for the workplace. I don't want everybody to be watching me walking around in my swimsuit and I think I'm appropriately dressed when I'm not. You know, the whole then you get into this whole culture of body shaming and being negative and discouraging people and manifesting and all of these different concepts. Okay, all of that is well and good, but how is that helping people face the truth? And I think that's why we see people struggling with disappointment in this community, because their expectations come out of the matrix. They're not coming from reality.
That is absolutely true, and I thank you so much for your very candid observations. And Dr. Virginia Rubaine, as we traverse through this month, but not only that, through life daily, we need to get to the point, I think, not only in our territory, but in the world where mental health is not a taboo. We thank you so much for your time, and you're welcome to come back to 284 Media anytime to speak on this topic as we continue to traverse and manage getting out of traps, processing change, and absolutely really dealing with reality and accepting realities. We thank you so much for your time, and do have
Thank you for
a good rest of
having
the day.
me.
You're most welcome. Viewers, that is not all the time we have. We have a lot more content for you. We're going to head out with Dr. Virginia Rubaine, but this evening at 6 p.m., please tune in for my colleague and I, Jovan Wilson, where we'll be bringing to you the latest happenings, both locally, regionally, and internationally. Have a happy Friday, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.